what is going on with Generation Z? According to new research for Channel 4, 52% of people aged between 13 and 27 said they thought the UK would be a better place if a strong leader was in charge who doesn't have to bother with Parliament and elections. So are some young people really turning away from democracy? And if so, why is this happening? Eddie Barnes is director of the John Smith Centre, joins us live this morning. Eddie, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
No, pleasure. I mean, your business is all about promoting democracy. How worried are you by this?
Well, we are worried. I mean, I think this is yet another kind of wake-up call, if you like, about the state of democracy and the views of Gen Z towards it. I mean, what I would say about a poll like this, obviously a poll like this is prompting people to give a yes/no question. I think you should look at the signal behind, what people are saying. I think it's not necessarily the case, I suspect, if you were to sit down and talk, and we do talk to young people a lot, that many of them are saying, we want an authoritarian in charge, we want the army to run the country. What they're really saying, I think the signal they're saying through a poll like this is we are thoroughly cheesed off with the way things are going right now under the current political order. If you're Gen Z, if you're in your 20s, politics has basically delivered you little but turmoil over the last 10 to 15 years in the UK. It's delivered little but economic stagnation. If you want to buy a house, that is outside of most people's gift. Your wages were probably not going up very much. So it's little wonder, I think, that this generation looks at established politics and says, can we have something better, please? Now, I don't think that's the same as saying, as I say, that they want to have an authoritarian leader in charge. But it is a protest, and I think it's something that our political parties, all of them, have to really consider very, very carefully.
I've seen a lot of people online reacting to this with frustration, Eddie. Is that feeling to grasp the role that generations past have played in reaching this point, that we are responsible for this state of affairs?
We being the older generations?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think intergenerational issues are definitely there's a definite tension there, and perhaps it's down to a kind of a sense we're looking at Gen Z. They're growing up in a very different world, a world where social media is so dominant in interactions, and there is a tension there, I think, between the world that we have passed on to them and perhaps a little bit of guilt about the world we've passed on to them. I think one of the things that political parties have to do is deal with this question of intergenerational injustice and looking at how you actually deliver. I mean, the young people we speak to are saying, look, we've had enough of politics. They're growing increasingly cynical of the ability of politics to actually make tangible improvements to their lives. And I think, like most people, they're looking for delivery and a sense that, political parties are on their side and understand where they're coming from.
Are we failing, perhaps, also in our teaching of history on this, Eddie? Because it's really interesting to hear what Esther had to say, coming from Hungary, a different perspective on this. Are we failing to teach young people why democracy matters?
I think it's all very well. You could argue, let's have some more classes and talk about this, and let's push everybody through democracy classes, and there's a definite place for that, and I don't diminish it. As I say, I think the proof is in the pudding. I don't think you can teach young people something that they're not then seeing in their own lives as they're growing up in their 20s and 30s. If the world that they're entering, as I say, politics is not delivering for them, and if the world they're entering has, a world where simply trying to rent a house or simply trying to buy a flat or whatever it happens to be is outside of their ability, then it's all very well saying, look, democracy is a wonderful thing. You've got to prove it. And I think that is the big challenge that's facing all of our political parties over the next few years.
Eddie, stay with us. Here's Andy Maciver as well on this, director of the PR company Message Matters, former director of communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Andy, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. What's your reaction to this?
I wasn't hugely surprised, if I'm being honest, by the numbers. And I think in part, that's because if we look at the age range of Gen Z, I mean, if you look at my generation and yours and Eddie's, right, we grew up and we know what dictatorship means in the eyes of, the former Soviet Union and the countries behind the Iron Curtain. And we know, Eddie and I, just at the end of last year, were in Sarajevo together, actually. And so, we look at it through the eyes of that type of nationalism and the problems that it caused. Our parents look at it in terms of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and Franco. And so, we have, I think, a greater instinctive understanding of what dictatorship and autocracy is. People in Generation Z don't really see any of that, and countries that they know to be dictatorships, like take China, for example, are places you can go on holiday. They're places that look outwardly like they're doing very well. They produce most of the stuff that we buy. And so I think that the dangers of dictatorship and the dangers of systems that don't have democracy are much more hidden, I think, from the current generation than they were from us. So I tend to agree with Eddie that, more classes doesn't necessarily help that. I actually think that it's almost lived experience and knowledge of what's going on elsewhere helps that. But dictatorships today are either outwardly more benevolent and harmless, like China, for instance, outwardly, I see, carefully there, or they're further away. They're not in the public eye, like countries in Africa, for instance, which we don't tend to really focus on very much. So I think a lot of it is probably driven by that.
What can politicians do, Andy, to address this?
Well, I think that's part of an important question which we're witnessing right now, because we're seeing a growth in nationalism throughout the world, sort of insular, territorial nationalism throughout the world, and not necessarily coinciding with dictatorship and a lack of democracy, but certainly heading towards that on the spectrum. So you mentioned Hungary earlier on. That's an obvious example of that. And there are other countries that can be brought into that as well. And I think these are symptoms of liberal democracies and what we might call kind of mainstream centrist governments failing to deliver on core issues. So they're delivering on fluffier issues that they think are important to young people, but not on the core issues which probably actually are. So Eddie mentioned earlier on getting a house, for instance. Young people now, Generation Z now, are not that much different to what Generation X was before them, and that what they actually want is a good job and a place to stay. That hasn't really changed through the generations, but I don't think that our governments in Western democracies have sufficient focus at all on providing that sort of opportunity. And I think we're focusing on the wrong things for the generation of people that we think we understand, but I think we probably fail to.
Eddie Barnes, Director of the John Smith Centre, what would you say to that? What more do those involved in politics need to do to address this issue?
Yeah, I think I agree with much of what Andy said. I think as I say, I think there's this need for tangible evidence that the state is tilting on this towards the cause of young people. I'll just mention one thing. Every single politician you speak to privately will, and goes right across all political boundaries, I would say, will say, yes, we accept that the triple lock on that's offered to pensioners is unsustainable and it's far too generous. And actually, pensioners have done really, really well over the last few years in seeing their pensions rise by, these guaranteed sums that the triple lock brings. And that has ensured that the state is doing an awful lot of, tilting towards that older generation. Now, I'd love to see, and I'm sure young people would love to see, a politician who's brave enough to say, you know what, we can't actually afford this. We actually need to start supporting young people into housing, building more homes, actually putting some of those resources of the state towards